I never wanted the house. Not once. People think inheriting property is some kind of blessing, like a safety net that makes life easier. But when the lawyer handed me that heavy iron key and whispered, "It's yours now," my stomach turned. He didn't even look me in the eye when he said it. He kept his head down, shuffling the papers like he couldn't wait to get rid of me. That was the first sign something was wrong. The house had been in my family for generations, long before I was born, long before my father, even my grandfather. It stood at the end of a dirt road no one cared to drive. Nobody wanted to talk about it at reunions. When I was a kid and asked about the old place, my dad always said the same thing. It's not a house, it's a responsibility. I never understood what he meant until the night he died. I was the last one left to take it. My uncles were gone. My cousins wanted nothing to do with it. My sister refused flat out, said she'd rather live on the street, so it came down to me, the youngest. The one who barely remembered the stories whispered late at night when the adults thought we were asleep. The stories about rules, about what happens when you break them. When I walked through the front door, the smell hit me first. Damp wood, old paper, and something metallic like rust or blood. The air was heavy, almost wet, and every breath felt like it stuck to the back of my throat. The walls were lined with portraits, faces of relatives I recognized only from faded family albums. Their eyes seemed to follow me, and in that moment I swear they weren't painted, they were watching, judging, waiting. On the table in the center of the living room was a box. Not fancy, just old oak with scratches carved deep into the surface. I opened it, and inside lay a stack of yellowed pages tied together with twine. On the top sheet, in handwriting I knew too well, were the words, "The rules." It was my father's handwriting. I sat down hard, my knees shaking, and untied the knot. The first page was stained, edges curled, but the letters were sharp, pressed into the page with a hand that must have been trembling. The very first rule read, "Never open the back door after midnight." I laughed at first. It sounded like superstition, like something you'd tell kids to keep them from sneaking out at night. But my laugh died in my throat when I noticed the dark brown smear across the bottom of the page. It wasn't ink. I flipped through the stack, each rule worse than the last. Never look into the mirror before dawn. Never let blood touch the floor. Never call each other by your real names after dark. The words crawled across the page like a curse, and the deeper I went, the more I felt something pressing against me from the walls, as if the house itself was listening. By the time I reached the last page, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the paper. There wasn't a rule written there, only a warning, scratched so deep into the sheet it tore through. If the rules change, so will we. I shoved the papers back into the box, tied the twine, and tried to convince myself it was nothing more than the ramblings of a dying man. Maybe my dad wrote them in a fever. Maybe he wanted to scare me away so I wouldn't sell the place. That's what I told myself. But when the clock struck midnight that first night, the knocking started. It was soft at first, like knuckles brushing against wood. Then louder. Then faster, 3 sharp pounds that rattled the frame of the back door. I froze, my eyes fixed on the hallway leading to the kitchen, and then through the silence came the voice. "Let me in." It was my mother's voice. My mother had been dead for 6 years. Every hair on my body stood on end. My mouth went dry. I wanted to move, to grab my phone, to call someone, anyone, but I couldn't. My feet wouldn't obey. I just stood there, staring down the hall as the voice grew sharper, more desperate. "Please, let me in. It's cold out here. Please." The urge to open the door nearly broke me. It wasn't just her voice. It was her cadence, the way she used to beg when she was upset, the little quiver at the end of her words. I could almost picture her standing out there in the dark, shivering. My hand lifted without me realizing, taking one slow step toward the kitchen. That's when I saw it. On the wall above the hallway, just faint enough to be missed before, the words were carved into the wood. Not painted, carved. They said, "Do not open the back door." Fresh shavings of wood dust lay on the floor beneath it, like someone had carved the warning only minutes before. I stumbled backward, shaking my head, whispering, "No, no, no." My voice cracked, the sound of it swallowed whole by the house. The knocking stopped. The voice stopped. Silence fell heavy, thicker than before. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room chair with the box of rules clutched tight against my chest, staring at the shadows shifting on the walls. By the time the sun rose, I thought maybe I'd imagined it all. But then I saw the prints. Bloody fingerprints smeared across the back door, as though someone had pressed their hands against it all night, waiting. And that was only the first rule. The house did not feel empty when the sun came up. That was the part that unsettled me the most. Morning light should have burned away the shadows, should have made the place feel smaller, warmer, like any other old building with too many corners. But it didn't. It felt alive. I walked through the rooms, every floorboard creaking under my weight, and with each sound came an echo, like the house was answering me. The kitchen was worse. That back door stood like a warning itself, faint fingerprints still smeared against the wood. I traced them with my eyes but refused to get too close. The lock was rusted but intact. The hinges groaned when I tested them. It struck me that whatever had been pounding, whatever had been begging to be let in, never tried to break the door. It only knocked, only begged, as if it knew I would eventually give in. I made coffee, though my hands shook too much to drink it. The house groaned around me, settling into the heat of the day, but I couldn't shake the sense that it was more than just wood and nails. My father's rules echoed in my head. Never open the back door after midnight. It seemed too simple, and yet the bloody prints were proof it was not a joke. By noon, exhaustion dragged at me. I hadn't slept, and every part of me wanted to collapse. I thought about leaving, just getting in the car and never coming back, but the thought of abandoning the house felt heavier than leaving behind a building. It felt like leaving behind a duty, a curse. My father had carried it, his father before him, and now me. The box of rules sat on the coffee table like a heartbeat, waiting. I untied the twine again, searching for answers. My eyes skimmed down to the second rule: never walk the upstairs hallway after dusk. I frowned. The hallway upstairs was the narrow strip that connected the bedrooms. Why would it matter what time I walked through it? My mind tried to rationalize. Old houses creak, floors weaken, maybe it was dangerous. But that didn't explain the wording. It wasn't about danger, it was about timing. That afternoon, I forced myself upstairs. The hallway was ordinary, lined with more portraits, more faces staring. The wallpaper was peeling, edges curled like old skin. A cold draft ran through even though the windows were shut. I stood there halfway down the hall and whispered to myself, "It's just a hallway." But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The sun dipped quicker than I expected. By 6 o'clock, the windows glowed orange and shadows stretched long and thin across the floorboards. I caught myself glancing at the hallway, my chest tightening. I told myself I would stay out of it. I'd follow the rule. That was the smart thing to do. But when night fell, the house decided for me. I was lying on the couch downstairs, staring at the ceiling when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from upstairs. My body froze, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the sound of settling wood. It was too rhythmic, too heavy. Someone was walking that hallway. I crept up the stairs, each step a betrayal, my mind screaming to turn back. At the top, the hallway stretched in front of me, swallowed by shadow. The portrait seemed darker now, eyes deeper, faces warped by the dim light. And then I saw it, a figure, at the far end, standing perfectly still. I couldn't make out the details, only the shape, tall, hunched slightly, head tilted as if it was listening. My pulse hammered in my ears. I wanted to shout, to demand who it was, but my throat locked up. The figure didn't move, it didn't breathe, it just waited, and then the floor beneath my foot creaked. The head snapped toward me, my chest seized, my heart nearly stopped, but the figure didn't advance. It only turned slowly, unnaturally, and began walking toward me. Each step landed with a deliberate thud, echoing down the narrow hall. I stumbled backward, nearly tumbling down the stairs, but when I blinked, the hallway was empty. The silence that followed was worse. It wasn't relief. It was dread, thick and suffocating. The rules weren't warnings. They were survival. I slammed the bedroom doors shut, dragged a chair under the handle of the master room, and sat there with my back against it until the first gray light of morning crept through the curtains. When I finally dared to open the door, the hallway was empty again, but something was different. On the wall, just above one of the portraits, words had been scratched into the plaster. "You walked." The letters were fresh, jagged, carved with something sharp. My hands trembled as I traced the grooves, fresh dust crumbling beneath my fingers. I realized then the rules weren't about keeping things out. They were about keeping me alive inside. And the house knew I'd broken one. Morning didn't bring relief. It brought silence so thick I thought the air itself was listening. The scratches on the wall, "You walked," sat behind my eyes like a brand. Every time I blinked, I saw them. The house had not just noticed me, it had spoken back. I tried to distract myself with the small routines my father once kept: coffee, checking the locks, pacing the perimeter, but all of it felt hollow. When I stepped into the kitchen, the back door was different. The smudges of bloody fingerprints were still there, but something new had appeared. Faint claw marks on the wood, as if something had tried to dig its way inside. They hadn't been there yesterday. The rules sat on the table where I left them. I picked them up with shaking hands, searching for anything that could make sense of what happened. My eyes found the third line: "Never look out the windows after midnight." It sounded ridiculous, a child's game, but after what I saw in the upstairs hallway, I no longer had the arrogance to doubt. Still, my mind fought back with logic. Maybe the family had superstitions, maybe my father wrote these when he was losing his grip on reality. But no. I remembered his face when he gave me the box, the way his eyes looked hollow, drained, as if every word he spoke cost him years. He wasn't crazy. He was tired. That night, I sat in the living room with every lamp lit. Midnight crept closer. The house grew restless with it, timbers popping, faint whispers of wind curling through the vents. I forced myself to stay in the chair, not to move. I kept my gaze on the rules clutched in my hands like a lifeline. Then I heard it, a tap against the glass. My head snapped up. The window to my left rattled softly, like something brushing against it from outside. My pulse spiked. I gripped the arms of the chair, forcing my eyes down, refusing to look. The rules screamed in my skull, "Never look." The tapping grew louder, slow, methodical. Tap, pause, tap. Each beat sent a shiver through me, vibrating the glass. I bit my lip so hard I tasted copper, anything to keep still. Then a voice followed. It was faint, muffled by the glass, but it was my father's voice. "Son, it's me. "Open up, please." My stomach dropped. Every instinct screamed to turn, to look, to throw open that window and see. I knew my father's voice better than anyone. The cadence, the rasp at the end of each word. It was him, but it couldn't be. He was states away, alive, breathing somewhere safe. "Please let me in, it's cold." The voice grew more desperate, the tapping harder, the glass shuddered. My nails dug into the chair arms. Sweat ran down my back. If I just turned my head a fraction, I'd see him. That's what it wanted. The rules weren't warnings, they were commands. Survival written plain. If I looked, it would not be my father standing there. I squeezed my eyes shut. My breath came shallow. The tapping turned violent now, a full pounding against the glass, rattling the frame. The voice broke into sobs, choked cries, words tumbling over themselves. "You can't ignore me, son. You can't leave me out here. I'm your blood. Look at me." The lamps flickered. Shadows jumped across the walls. My jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth would crack. I whispered to myself over and over, "Don't look, don't look, don't look." And then, just as suddenly, silence. The room stilled. The house exhaled. My shoulders sagged, every muscle trembling. I thought it was over, until the glass cracked. I opened my eyes in time to see a thin fracture spiderweb across the window pane, right where a handprint bloomed. Too large to be human, too long in the fingers, smeared red as if pressed from the inside out. I stumbled back, knocking over the chair, clutching the rules to my chest. My heart thundered so loud it drowned out thought. But even as panic flooded me, one thing was clear: the rules were not enough. The house was changing them, testing me. Because beneath the handprint, fresh words appeared in the condensation on the glass, written by something I could not see. "You almost looked." The message stayed there long after the condensation should have faded, burned into the glass like frost. I backed into the center of the room, shaking. The first 3 rules had nearly broken me, each one pulling me closer to something I didn't understand, and there were 13 more waiting. I realized then the truth. Surviving the house wasn't about obeying the rules blindly. It was about outlasting the hunger behind them. The house wanted me to slip, to make one mistake, and when I did, it would not knock, it would not beg, it would simply take. And I had 13 more nights to prove I could survive. I didn't sleep after what happened with the window. The handprint was still there in the morning, like the glass had swallowed it. No one else could have done that. It came from the inside. Every time I walked past the living room, I felt its shape staring at me, daring me to come closer, daring me to forget the rules. I made coffee, but it tasted like ash. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I realized how quickly the house was wearing me down. 3 nights, 3 rules, and I was already fraying. I picked up the list again. My eyes fell to the next line, the 4th rule, written in my father's messy scrawl. "If you hear footsteps on the stairs, don't move until they stop." That was it. Simple, straightforward, but every muscle in my body tightened just reading it. I remembered the hallway upstairs, how I had already seen something, someone standing there in the dark. Now the rules were telling me it could come closer. All day, I tried to distract myself. I fixed a loose cabinet door in the kitchen, walked circles around the yard, even forced myself to read old magazines left behind by the last guard. But the rules hovered over everything I did. I kept glancing at the staircase like it was a loaded gun. By nightfall, the house seemed to lean into its own silence. The creaks and groans of wood shifting had a rhythm to them now, a pattern I could almost mistake for breathing. I sat in the living room, the rules on the table beside me, my back turned deliberately away from the stairs. Midnight came and went. I almost let myself believe nothing would happen. Then the first footstep echoed. It was heavy, deliberate on the top stair. My head snapped up before I could stop myself. The sound vibrated down through the walls, through the floor, straight into my chest. Another followed, then another. They were slow, patient. Something descending step by step, careful not to rush, as if savoring the sound. My breath caught in my throat. The rules screamed inside me, "Don't move." I froze in the chair. My eyes locked on the floor, refusing to look toward the stairs. I counted each step in my head. 7, 8, 9. The weight of it was undeniable. These weren't the groans of wood, not some trick of an old house. These were footsteps. Halfway down, they paused. The silence pressed on me, heavier than the steps themselves. I didn't dare shift. Even my heartbeat felt too loud. Then, after what felt like hours, they continued. 10, 11, 12. Closer now. So close I swore I could feel the air stir with each descent. I wanted to run, to scream, to do something, but I knew in the deepest part of me that if I moved before they stopped, whatever was on those stairs would know exactly where I was. The last step creaked. The 13th. Then silence. I couldn't breathe. My muscles ached from being so still. The air thickened, and in that silence I understood something terrible. The steps had ended, but they hadn't turned back. They were standing in the entryway, just out of sight, waiting. I squeezed my eyes shut. I told myself it was almost over, that if I just waited long enough it would go back up. Seconds bled into minutes. My chest burned. My hands went numb from gripping the chair, and then a whisper, "You shouldn't be here." The voice was low, gravelly, right behind me, not from the stairs, from the living room itself. Every instinct begged me to look, to prove nothing was there. But the fourth rule wasn't about looking, it was about moving. If I so much as twitched, if I so much as breathed too loud, I'd be breaking it. The whisper came again, closer now, brushing the shell of my ear. "Leave before the rules change again." My eyes watered from the effort of keeping still. My skin crawled with the presence hovering inches away. And then, as suddenly as it began, the footsteps started again, this time ascending. One by one, back up into the darkness above. When the last creak faded, the air lightened. My limbs shook as I slumped forward, drenched in sweat. I'd survived another night, but survival didn't feel like victory. It felt like postponement. I staggered toward the stairs once the sun came up, driven by a need to see. But the top landing was empty. No prints, no shadows, nothing to prove what I'd heard. Except for one thing. On the second step from the top, carved deep into the wood, were words that hadn't been there before. "You moved." My stomach dropped because I hadn't, not even a twitch. And yet the house had marked me guilty. That was when I understood. The rules weren't just there to protect me. They were there to trap me, to twist me, to keep me second-guessing every breath I took. Obedience wasn't enough. The house would change the terms, shift the boundaries, punish me whether I faltered or not. And if the footsteps could already reach the bottom of the stairs, how much closer would they get tomorrow night? The carving haunted me. "You moved." I kept tracing the words with my fingertips over and over until the grooves bit into my skin. It didn't matter that I hadn't moved. The house thought I had. And that was worse than moving itself, because it meant the rules weren't fixed. They were watching me, bending around me, waiting for me to break. By the 5th night, I wasn't sleeping anymore. I just sat in the living room, staring at the crumpled page where my father's rules were written. Coffee had become my only meal. My reflection in the dark window didn't look like me anymore. That night, I unfolded the paper again, even though I knew the words by heart. My eyes found the next line. "Don't answer if someone knocks." no matter who it sounds like. I read it 10 times, my stomach tightening with each repetition. The phrasing was so casual, but the warning behind it made my skin prickle. No matter who it sounds like. I thought of the whisper on the stairs, the voice that wasn't mine but knew me anyway. What if it knocked? What if it sounded like my mother or my brother or even myself? The clock hit midnight. The house was still. For the first hour, nothing happened. I almost convinced myself the night would be quiet, that maybe the rule was just a formality. Then came the first knock. It wasn't loud, just a soft rapping at the front door, 3 quick taps. My heart leapt into my throat. The sound was ordinary, like a neighbor stopping by. If I'd been anywhere else in the world, I would have opened it without a second thought. But here in this house, the knock was a threat. I stayed in my chair, gripping the arms until my knuckles went white. Another knock followed, harder this time. Then came a voice. "Hey, it's me, open up." I froze, my blood went cold. That was my brother's voice, perfect. Every inflection, every casual impatience, but my brother had been dead for 3 years. The air in the room thickened, heavy with memory. The voice outside spoke again, softer this time. "Come on, you know it's me, just unlock the door." I bit down on my lip until I tasted blood. The rules screamed in my head, "Don't answer, no matter who it sounds like." The knocking grew frantic, fists pounding against the wood. The voice rose into a desperate shout. "Why won't you let me in? Don't you remember what you promised me? You said you'd never shut me out." The words cut deeper than the pounding. My brother had said something like that once, years before he died. The memory was so raw, so real, that for a second I actually reached for the doorknob. My fingers hovered inches from it before I yanked them back. "No," I whispered to myself. "You're not real, you're not him." The house didn't like that. The pounding stopped. Silence. My breath came fast and shallow, and then impossibly the voice shifted. "Son," it said. I staggered backward, my knees almost giving out. This time it was my father's voice. Low, steady, filled with that sharp edge of command I had grown up fearing. He'd been gone even longer than my brother. "Open the door," the voice said. "You think you can survive this place without me. You think you understand the rules. You don't. You're failing already. Let me in and I'll fix it, just like before." The weight of his authority crashed over me, pulling at every instinct I'd been trained to obey. My hand twitched toward the knob again, trembling like a compass needle fighting to find north. Then the door itself shuddered. Something on the other side pushed hard enough to rattle the frame. My whole body shook with the vibration. The voice rose to a roar. "Open the door." Every word slammed through the house like thunder. The walls shook. The lights flickered. My chest burned with panic. And then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. No more pounding. No more voices. Just silence. I sank to the floor, gasping, sweat dripping into my eyes. My hands were bleeding where my nails had dug into my palms. I had obeyed the rule. I hadn't answered. But then I saw it. The bottom edge of the door was glowing faintly red, like embers smoldering in the wood. I crawled closer, drawn by a mix of fear and curiosity, and there, burned into the grain, were fresh words. "Next time you will." My whole body trembled, because I knew whatever was outside that door wasn't finished. It had tested me tonight, and next time it would be stronger, closer, harder to resist. And deep down, beneath the fear, beneath the exhaustion, I felt something worse than terror. The smallest part of me wanted to open it, wanted to see my brother again, wanted to hear my father's voice without the emptiness of memory. That was the real danger of the 5th rule. Not just that something would knock, but that it would sound like someone you missed too much to ignore. And as I lay there, staring at the faint glow beneath the door, I realized the house had found its sharpest weapon yet: my grief. I didn't move from the floor for a long time after the knocking stopped. My ears strained against the silence, waiting for more voices, for more pounding, for the house to make its next demand. But nothing came. Only the faint glow at the bottom of the door slowly fading, leaving the wood scarred and blackened. I dragged myself up and stumbled back to the kitchen table. The rules page lay there, edges frayed, stained with coffee and sweat. I didn't want to read it again. Every time I did, the words seemed heavier, like they were waiting to crush me, but I forced myself. The next line was simple, just 6 words. Don't look at the mirrors after dark. I froze, my mouth went dry. I thought about all the mirrors in the house, the bathroom, the one in my bedroom, the cracked oval hanging in the hallway, even the faint reflection in the living room window when the lights were on. After dark, I'd been catching glimpses of myself in them all week, hollow-eyed, pale, twitching. Was that already breaking the rule? I remembered my father's voice in old arguments. Mirrors don't just show you, they let you see what doesn't want to be seen. I'd brushed it off back then as superstition, but here now it felt like a warning I'd ignored for too long. The night stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Every shadow looked sharper, every reflection deeper. I tried not to look, tried to keep my eyes on the floor or the crumpled paper, but it was impossible to avoid them all. At some point, I had to go to the bathroom. The hallway felt like it narrowed as I walked, the cracked oval mirror on the wall pulling at me like a magnet. I kept my gaze fixed ahead, counting steps, but as I passed it, my eyes flicked up, just for a second, and that was all it took. The reflection wasn't me. It had my face, yes, but the skin sagged like wax melting in heat. The eyes were too dark, too wide, pupils swallowing the whites until they looked like pits. Worst of all, it smiled. I wasn't smiling. My mouth was clamped shut, jaw locked, but in the mirror my lips curled back into a grin too wide for my face. I stumbled back, hitting the wall. My breath caught in my throat. The figure in the glass leaned closer, pressing its forehead against the inside of the mirror. The grin stretched further, skin tearing at the corners of its mouth. Then it whispered, "Finally." I bolted into the bathroom, slamming the door shut. My chest heaved, and my hands shook so hard I could barely turn the lock. I didn't dare look at the mirror above the sink, but I felt it. Felt eyes staring into the back of my skull, waiting for me to make the mistake of turning my head. I kept them shut tight. I fumbled blindly for the towel draped over the rack and threw it over the mirror, like covering it could smother whatever was inside. The room felt lighter instantly, like I'd closed a lid on something hungry. I stayed there for what felt like hours, crouched on the cold tile floor, refusing to open my eyes. When I finally did, dawn light seeped pale and gray through the frosted window. My body ached from being curled up, but the air no longer pressed in around me. I stepped out carefully, eyes fixed to the floor. In the hallway, the oval mirror was waiting. Cracked, crooked, dust-streaked. I forced myself not to look, but I felt the pull. Like if I dared, I'd see that smiling thing again. Back in the kitchen, the paper sat where I'd left it, my father's rules. They were supposed to keep me safe, but each one only seemed to drag me deeper. My reflection wasn't just mine anymore. The house had touched it, twisted it, claimed it. I should have felt relief that I survived the night, that I hadn't looked too long. But instead, dread filled me, heavier than before, because now I knew the truth. The house wasn't only trying to break me from outside. It wanted to hollow me out from within. And as I poured myself another bitter cup of coffee, one thought sank like lead in my gut. If I avoided the mirrors, maybe I could survive a little longer. But what if the thing inside them didn't need my permission to get out? That night I didn't even pretend I could sleep. The rules had burned themselves into my head, but the last one I read, "Don't look at the mirrors after dark," kept echoing louder than the others. Every surface in the house seemed ready to betray me. The windows, the shiny metal faucet, even the black screen of the TV when it was turned off. All of them could show me what I didn't want to see. The sun dipped, shadows stretched, and the house began to creak in that way it only did after nightfall. Each groan of wood sounded alive, like it wasn't just settling but shifting to make room for something else. I brewed coffee again, just to keep my hands busy. The bitter smell filled the kitchen, but the warmth didn't chase away the cold not growing in my stomach. I tried to stay in the living room, away from the hallway with its oval mirror and away from the bathroom sink. But the longer I sat there, the more I felt the house closing in on me, like walls breathing, like something circling me just out of sight. At some point I must have dozed. Not real sleep, just that half-conscious haze where dreams bleed into reality. That's when I heard it, a soft scraping sound. Not from the door this time, not from the windows, it was coming from inside the walls. I sat up so fast my head spun. The noise stopped. The room was silent again, too silent. Then it started up once more, behind me this time. I turned toward the wall by the kitchen table, and for the first time I saw it. A thin red line seeping down the wallpaper. Blood. It trickled in slow, heavy drops, soaking into the pale pattern like veins spreading under skin. I backed away, but the line grew longer, branching, widening, until it looked like the walls themselves were bleeding. The air stank of iron. I remembered the rules, the way my father had written them, but none of them mentioned this. The mirrors, the knocking, the voices, I had been prepared or at least warned. But the walls, he hadn't said anything about that. The scraping grew louder, closer. Something was inside, pushing, trying to claw its way out. My chest tightened, panic clawing up my throat. I wanted to run, but where? The front door. The windows, all of them were traps. I was boxed in. That's when I made my mistake. I whispered out loud, "What do you want?" The sound died the moment it left my lips, swallowed by the walls themselves. Then the scraping stopped. Silence. I thought maybe I'd broken whatever rhythm it had. Maybe it would leave me alone if I ignored it. But then 3 knocks. Sharp, deliberate. Not at the door this time, but from inside the wall, just feet away from me. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, patient, like whoever was there wasn't in a hurry. I stumbled back, my heel hitting the leg of the table. The rules page fluttered, sliding across the wood, and for the first time I saw faint ink beneath the last line I'd read. It had been hidden by the fold before, nearly erased by smudges and stains. My heart lurched as I leaned in. There it was, another rule. On the 7th night, don't answer when it speaks. The paper trembled in my hand. 7th night, tonight. Before I could process, the voice came. It didn't sound like my father this time, or any human I knew. It was thin, stretched too far, like someone trying to imitate a voice but not quite getting the shape right. "Let me out," it whispered. My body locked. I couldn't breathe. I pressed the paper against my chest like it could shield me. The walls pulsed, blood dripping faster, pooling at the baseboards. Again the voice, "Let me out." It dragged the words long, almost tender, almost pleading. I clenched my teeth, forcing myself not to answer, not to say anything. My mind screamed with questions. Who are you? What are you? Why me? But I remembered the line, "Don't answer." The silence between each whisper stretched thin, unbearable. It was like holding your breath underwater, waiting for your lungs to burst. Finally, I snapped. I shouted, not words, just a sound. A raw, guttural noise that ripped out of me before I could stop it. The walls shuddered in response. The voice chuckled, low and rasping, like stone dragged across stone. "You're learning," it said. Then it stopped. The bleeding slowed, the scraping ceased, and the house went still again. Only the smell of iron lingered, thick and cloying, sinking into my clothes, my skin. I slumped against the table, shaking. My throat burned and my eyes stung, but I was alive. I hadn't broken the rule completely. I hadn't answered it, not really. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling I'd given it exactly what it wanted, proof I was listening. When dawn finally came, pale and weak, I sat surrounded by dried blood stains spidering across the wallpaper. They didn't vanish with the light. They stayed, proof that the house had bled and that something had spoken through it. And though I tried to tell myself I'd survived another night, deep down I knew the truth. I hadn't won. I'd only delayed whatever was coming. When I finally dragged myself out of the living room that morning, the walls still bore their red stains, dried into the paper like veins frozen mid-throb. I kept expecting them to vanish, like a bad dream washed away by daylight. But they stayed, as if the house wanted me to remember that the night belonged to it, not me. I told myself I had to get out just for an hour to breathe air that didn't smell like rust and rot. So I stepped onto the porch. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds, but it was still a relief. I stood there, gulping air, when I noticed movement above me. Someone was leaning on the upstairs balcony. It startled me. I hadn't seen anyone up there in all the nights I'd been here. The figure was a woman, her frame thin, shoulders hunched, hair spilling in messy dark strands over her face. She wore what looked like a pale housecoat, washed out from too many rinses. She didn't wave. She didn't smile, just looked down at me. "You're new," she said. Her voice was flat, almost brittle, like paper tearing. "Yeah," I managed, just filling in. Her eyes flicked toward the house, then back at me. "You read the rules." My heart stalled. No one had mentioned the rules outside of my father's notes. I hadn't told a soul. Yeah, I said carefully. She nodded once, slow. Then she leaned further over the railing. "Don't let it hear your real name." I froze. That wasn't on my father's list. Before I could ask her anything, she straightened, her thin fingers gripping the railing. "It's listening," she whispered, almost too soft to catch. And then she stepped back into shadow, disappearing into the upstairs apartment. I stood there for a long time, pulse hammering, staring at the empty balcony. My father hadn't mentioned neighbors. He'd never said anything about other people living in the building. Was she real, or just another trick of the house? By the time I forced myself back inside, the note of her warning wouldn't leave me. "Don't let it hear your real name." That night, I tried to prepare. I taped over the bathroom mirror, covered the TV screen with a blanket, anything reflective I could find. The dried blood on the walls remained hidden beneath sheets I pinned up, but no cloth could muffle the memory of its voice. I sat there with the rules clutched in my hand, my coffee growing cold, waiting. Around midnight, I heard footsteps, not outside, not below, above. They creaked steadily across the ceiling, pacing, pausing, starting again. Sometimes heavy, sometimes light, like more than one person walked up there. I thought about the woman, her housecoat, her warning. Maybe it really was just her. Maybe she was moving around, restless. Then the footsteps stopped directly above me. I looked up, holding my breath. The ceiling groaned. Dust drifted down in a thin line across the table. Then 3 knocks. Not on the wall this time. From the ceiling. I nearly shouted her name, but stopped, because I didn't know it. and something deep inside told me I wasn't supposed to. A whisper followed, muffled but clear enough to cut through the plaster. "Say your name." My blood turned cold. The voice wasn't hers. It was too deep, too wide, like it was coming from a throat that didn't belong to one body. I pressed both hands over my mouth, shaking. The rules screamed in my head. "Don't answer. Don't let it hear your real name." The ceiling creaked as if weight shifted, crawling. Then it came again, closer to where I sat. "Say your name." The words dragged down through the beams, vibrating in my skull. I couldn't take it. I bolted from the chair, stumbling down the hall. My shoulder slammed against the wall where the blood stains had been. For a second, I thought they'd open again, but they stayed dry. The knocking followed me, moving across the ceiling, step by step. The thing, whatever it was tracking me, waiting for me to slip. I ducked into the kitchen, crouching low, trying to control my breathing. That's when I heard another sound, faint like a second voice. "You don't have to play with it," the voice said. It was the woman, the upstairs neighbor. Her tone was sharp, urgent. "Stay quiet." I almost cried with relief. She was real, she was here. But then, overlapping her, the deeper voice thundered again. "Say your name." The two voices tangled above me, one human, one not. My head pounded, fear curling tight in my chest. The minutes stretched, unbearable. Finally, the ceiling went silent. The air thinned. The whole house seemed to sigh, as if whatever lingered above had grown bored. I didn't move until dawn crept weakly through the windows. My legs had gone numb from crouching, and my throat burned from holding back screams. When I finally stood, I glanced up at the ceiling. There were 3 long cracks etched into the plaster now, jagged and dark, as though something heavy had dragged its nails across from the other side. And in the silence that followed, only one thought stuck with me, chilling me deeper than the blood on the walls or the voices in the night. The neighbor upstairs had known my father's rules, but she had her own set too. The air in the house had already been heavy for days, pressing down on my chest like a wet blanket that refused to let go. But that night, it felt different, thicker, charged, as if the walls were waiting. It started just after midnight. I was sitting in the chair by the door, the same chair my father had used when he kept watch. I thought about his rules over and over like a prayer. Don't open the door, don't answer when it calls, never speak your real name. My eyes burned from exhaustion, but I didn't dare let them close. Then I heard it, the lock slowly turning. At first, I told myself it was the house shifting or maybe the draft rattling the old metal, but the sound was too deliberate. A twist, a pause, another twist. Someone or something was on the other side of the door. The handle rattled, not fast, not frantic, patient, testing. My skin crawled. I gripped the arm of the chair until my knuckles whitened. Then silence. I thought maybe it had given up. But when I glanced toward the window, my breath caught. There was a shadow stretched long across the thin curtain. A figure, tall, unnaturally tall, shoulders squared, head bent as though he was peering in. I froze. The house seemed to freeze with me. Then he moved. He stepped closer, and for the first time I saw him clearly through the thin veil of fabric. A man or something wearing the shape of one, dressed entirely in gray. His coat fell stiffly around him, the seams sharp like an old military uniform. A wide-brimmed hat cast most of his face in shadow, but the grin cut through the dark like a wound, too wide, too sharp, wrong in every possible way. He raised his hand and tapped the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Each knock felt like it landed directly against my chest. Then he spoke. His voice was hollow yet booming, as though it came from inside the walls themselves. "Do you know your name?" I didn't answer, couldn't. My father's rules screamed inside my skull, never say your name, never let it hear. The man tilted his head, his grin stretching even wider. He tapped again. Your name, give it to me. I pressed my lips shut. My whole body trembled, but I stayed silent. The man didn't move for a moment. Then softly he began to hum. A low, broken sound, more vibration than melody. It seeped through the glass, through the walls. Through me, my teeth rattled, my stomach twisted, and then he started saying names. One by one, whispered like a litany. Names I didn't recognize at first, but the walls seemed to. Each time he spoke, the plaster groaned, the wood creaked, like the house remembered those people. Then he said one I knew, my father's. I nearly gagged. No one outside the family knew my father's full name. Not neighbors, not co-workers. Yet the man in gray spoke it like he had owned it forever. And when he did, I heard heavy footsteps upstairs. Too heavy to be the neighbor, too heavy to be human. My breath came shallow and quick. My hands dug into the arms of the chair. I wanted to shout, to scream, but I knew if I opened my mouth, the house would hear. The man leaned closer to the glass. His grin filled the window. You're next. The words were barely louder than a whisper, but they echoed inside me like a church bell. My vision swam. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Then nothing. The shadow peeled away from the curtain. The porch creaked once. Silence. I thought maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe my brain had finally snapped. But then I noticed something new. On the wall near the window where the shadow had lingered, the plaster was marked. At first I thought it was another crack, one of the countless fractures splitting through the house. But no, these were letters. Carved deep, jagged, still damp, as if the wall itself had bled them out. 3 words, tell me soon. I stumbled back, my stomach heaving. The words weren't just scratched, they pulsed. For a moment, I swore they moved, like the house was breathing them at me. I wanted to run, but where would I go? The rules didn't say anything about escape. They only ever said survive until morning, so I sat. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the house, the faint hum of something still lingering in the walls. Every second stretched, every shadow stretched wider. But the worst part wasn't the waiting, it was the knowing. The man in gray had spoken my father's name like it was his. He had taken it, claimed it, and now he wanted mine. Sooner or later he would come back, and the house would make sure I answered. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time my eyelids grew heavy, the sound of that man's voice echoed inside me, low, hollow, cutting through my bones. Do you know your name? His grin haunted me even when I blinked, etched behind my eyes like a burn mark. And worse than his face were the words carved into the wall, tell me soon. By morning, the letters had dried, but they hadn't faded. They remained dark, jagged, and alive. I swore I saw them pulse faintly when I walked past, like they were waiting for an answer. I tried to ignore them, but the house doesn't let you ignore things. Around noon, I opened my father's old notebook, the one where he had copied the rules again and again, as though writing them down kept them true. I read them slowly, lips barely moving. Lock the doors at sundown. Never look directly at the upstairs window. Don't open the door when it knocks. Never speak your real name inside the house. If the neighbor calls, don't answer. Stay inside until the sun rises. I'd lived my whole life by these words. My father drilled them into me. My grandfather drilled them into him. They were all that had kept us alive. But then I saw it. A new line, not in my father's handwriting, not in ink. It was carved into the paper, deep enough to tear through several pages. 7. The rules will not protect you forever. My throat went dry. My fingers shook as I traced the letters. The groove in the page felt fresh, sharp, as if someone had carved it while I slept. Except I hadn't slept. I had been awake every second, gripping the chair, staring at the walls. I didn't write this. My father didn't write this. That meant the house did. I shoved the notebook shut and pressed my hands to my head, trying to steady my thoughts. But the more I fought it, the more one truth drilled into me. The rules weren't fixed. They were changing, and not in my favor. That night, the change became clear. The house creaked earlier than usual, the boards groaning before the sun had even set. The shadows lengthened in ways that didn't make sense, stretching far too long, reaching toward me like grasping fingers. At 8 p.m., the knocks came, not at the door, not at the window, from inside. 3 sharp raps against the wall behind me. I froze, my heart hammering. The rules had always said don't open the door when it knocks, but what about when it comes from within? I flipped open the notebook again, desperate. The words seemed to shimmer, rearranging themselves as though the paper was alive. The first rule now read: 1. Lock the doors, they are already inside. I staggered back, my stomach turned. I read it again, hoping I had misseen, but no, it was written clearly. Not my father's words anymore, something else had overwritten them. The knocking grew louder, faster. It moved along the wall, circling the room. I stumbled toward the chair by the door, clutching it like it could anchor me. My father used to sit there and tell me, as long as you follow the rules, you'll survive. But now the rules themselves were betraying me. Do you know your name? The voice again, not from outside this time, from the walls, from everywhere. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The words rattled inside my skull, spoken in the man's voice, in my father's voice, in mine. Then came the worst part. The notebook's pages turned on their own. I didn't touch them. They flipped one after another, faster than I could follow. And on each page a new line appeared, carved deep, bleeding ink. 8. Answer when spoken to. 9. The walls remember every name. 10. Refusal is not survival. I slammed the book shut, but it was too late. The house had heard my silence. The air thickened, pressing against me. The lights flickered, then died, leaving me in blackness, broken only by the faint glow of moonlight leaking through the curtains. And in that glow, I saw movement. The gray figure stood at the center of the room. Hat low, coat stiff, grin too wide. His presence sucked all the air out of the space, leaving me choking on nothing. He didn't move at first, just stared, head tilted, smile carved deep into his face. Then he whispered again. Your name, give it. My knees buckled. Every instinct screamed to run, to hide, but my body wouldn't obey. My lips trembled, almost forming the first letter of my name. I bit down hard until I tasted blood, forcing myself silent. His grin widened impossibly, and then he was gone. No movement, no fade, just gone. I collapsed into the chair, chest heaving, sweat dripping down my temples. For a moment, I thought I had resisted, that maybe I had won. But then I saw the notebook again, lying open on the floor. A single fresh line cut across the page, wet and glistening. 11. If you do not give your name, it will be taken. The words burned into me, because I realized the rules weren't just guidelines anymore. They were a sentence, and whether I followed them or not, the ending would be the same. The rules had changed, and the house wanted more. I don't know what time it was when I finally stood up. The notebook still lay on the floor, pages twitching as if they were breathing. My mouth was dry, my eyes burned, but I couldn't look away from that last rule carved across the paper. If you do not give your name, it will be taken. Taken. The word lodged in my chest like a blade. My father had warned me about breaking rules. He had told me stories about people who didn't listen, neighbors, distant relatives, even his own brother. But he had never said the rules could rewrite themselves. He had never said they could demand more than silence and obedience. And yet, I already knew what the house wanted. It wanted me in apartment 3B. That door had always been locked, always cold to the touch. My father had warned me, don't step inside, don't even try. I used to walk past it quickly, like the hallway itself might swallow me if I lingered too long. But now, standing there with the notebook burning in my hands, I felt drawn to it. The knocking had stopped. The whispers had faded. The house was quiet again, but not calm. It was the kind of silence that hums against your skin, like the whole place is holding its breath, waiting for you to make the wrong move. I pressed my palm to the door of 3B. It was warm, too warm, like someone was standing just on the other side, waiting. The key wasn't in my pocket. I had never had one, but when I turned the knob, it clicked open anyway. My stomach twisted. Every nerve in my body screamed to shut it again, to walk away, but my hand kept moving. The door groaned as it swung inward. The air inside smelled like copper. At first, I thought the apartment was empty. The furniture was covered in white sheets, sagging with dust. The walls were cracked, streaked with water damage. The floorboards creaked under my weight, but then I saw it. Blood. Thin streaks of it ran down from the ceiling, dripping in steady lines onto the sheets, staining them rusty brown. It was fresh. I tilted my head back, following the trails up, and froze. Names, dozens of them, hundreds, carved into the plaster overhead, each one scored deep like someone had scratched them with a blade. The blood leaked from the letters themselves, trickling down to the floor. And there, near the center, was mine. Not just once, over and over. My name carved in every direction, layered on top of itself until the letters blurred. Some looked old, faded. Some looked new. And one was still wet, as though it had been carved seconds before I entered. I staggered back, slamming into the wall. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was what my father had hidden from me. Not to protect me, but because he knew there was no protection left. A sound cut through the silence. Whistling. Low, tuneless, drifting out from the far corner of the room. I spun, searching the shadows. The sheet on the sofa rippled. Something sat beneath it. I forced my legs to move, inching closer. My fingers gripped the edge of the sheet and tugged. Beneath it sat a chair. And in the chair, bones. A whole skeleton slumped forward, ribs poking through torn fabric. But that wasn't what made me drop the sheet and stumble back. It was the hat. A wide-brimmed gray hat tilted low on the skull. I choked back a cry, clutching the wall for balance. My skin crawled. The grin I had seen in the hallway, the man in gray, it wasn't a ghost. It wasn't some shadow, it was him, or it had been, and yet he was still walking these halls. I wanted to run to get out of that apartment, but something held me there. My father's voice, buried deep in memory. If you enter 3B, you never leave the same. I understood now, because when I turned back toward the wall of names, my head spun, and for a heartbeat, I wasn't in the apartment anymore. I was inside the wall. Darkness pressed against me, tight and suffocating. Voices hissed around me, calling my name, whispering it until it fractured into nothing. The blood dripped past my face, hot, sticky. And in that suffocating void, I heard the man in gray, clear as if he were inches from my ear. "You belong here, you always did." Then the floor slammed back beneath my feet, and I was in 3B again. Gasping, shaking, the notebook heavy in my hands. I flipped it open without meaning to, desperate for some kind of answer. A new rule had appeared, slashed across the page. 12. Return to where it began. My throat closed. My father had always told me the rules were a map for survival, a way forward. But now I realized they weren't guiding me out. They were guiding me deeper in. And 3B wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I don't remember leaving 3B. 1 second I was staring at the wall, bleeding names, my own carved into it 100 times over. The next, I was in the hallway, back against the peeling wallpaper, lungs heaving like I'd run a marathon. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the notebook. I pressed it to my chest like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. The hallway was empty. No whispers. No footsteps, but the silence wasn't comforting. It was heavy, like the building itself was watching me. I forced my eyes down to the notebook. The last rule burned in black ink, freshly written, the edges of the letters still bleeding into the page. 12. Return to where it began. I flipped the pages, desperate, searching for something, anything that made sense, and then I saw it. Halfway through the book, words I swear hadn't been there before crawled up from the paper. 7. When you hear your name, don't answer. I froze. My father had mentioned something like it when I was a kid, but I thought it was just one of his paranoid superstitions. He used to snap at me if I answered too quickly when he called me, his face pale, eyes darting like someone else might echo his voice. You never know if it's me, he'd said once, his voice trembling. And if it isn't, you don't want to find out. Now here it was, etched into the rules themselves. The 7th rule. My stomach dropped, because even as I stared at it, I heard my name. Soft at first, almost like a sigh. It came from down the hallway, from behind the corner where the light flickered weakly. My throat tightened. My name again, a little louder this time. It was my mother's voice. I hadn't heard her voice in years. She was gone, dead, long before my father. But it was her. Exactly her. The way she used to say my name when I'd scrape my knee as a kid, or when she'd call me in for dinner. Come here, she whispered. Every muscle in my body wanted to move, to believe, to step forward and turn the corner, but the notebook trembled in my grip. Rule 7 stared back at me. When you hear your name, don't answer. I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. My eyes burned with tears I hadn't felt coming. My mother's voice came again, this time breaking like she was crying. Please help me. I almost broke. Almost. But then I remembered the wall in 3B, dripping blood. My name etched again and again, like something had been calling it for years, waiting for me to answer. I forced myself back against the wall, shaking my head, biting down on my tongue until I tasted iron. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The voice shifted. It wasn't my mother anymore. It was deeper, rougher, a man's voice now, my father's. You're already mine, it growled. My knees buckled and I dropped to the floor. I wanted to cover my ears, but I couldn't let go of the notebook. I pressed it tighter against me instead, squeezing my eyes shut. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing against my chest. Then it stopped. No voice, no sound, just silence again. When I opened my eyes, something had changed. The walls of the hallway were darker, stained. Long black streaks crawled down from the ceiling like veins. The light bulb above me buzzed and sputtered, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. And there, written in the cracks of the wall in fresh, jagged letters, was my name again, over and over. Only this time I hadn't answered. The notebook in my hands warmed as if it approved. Another line bled onto the page beneath Rule 7. Good. I exhaled, a ragged breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd done the right thing. That resisting meant I'd passed some kind of test, but the relief didn't last, because I realized something. The voice wasn't trying to trick me into leaving the hallway. It was trying to trick me into leaving myself. If I had answered, maybe I would have stepped out of my own body the way I'd been pulled into the walls in 3B. Maybe I wouldn't be here anymore. I don't know what would have taken my place. I tried to steady my breathing, but then, faintly, I heard footsteps. Not the heavy stomp of the man in gray, not the shuffling whispers from before. These were soft, deliberate, like someone was barefoot walking just behind me. I spun, but the hallway was empty. Except for the door to 3B, it was open again. The smell of copper rolled out, thick and suffocating. My stomach churned. The shadows inside seemed deeper now, pulsing like a heartbeat, and carved into the doorframe, fresh and raw, was another rule, one I hadn't seen before. 13. The walls are listening. I backed away, clutching the notebook like it could shield me. The walls groaned softly as if agreeing. And then, faint as a whisper, I heard it again. My name. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from inside my own head. The walls were breathing. I could hear it now, faint but steady, an inhale, an exhale. The air itself pulsed in rhythm, and each time I put my hand against the wallpaper, it felt warm, damp, alive. The words carved into the doorframe of 3B repeated in my head like a drumbeat. The walls are listening. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that my mind was fraying from exhaustion, from fear, from whatever this place was doing to me. But denial is hard when your own skin is wet with something that isn't sweat. I looked down at my hand. It was streaked red. Blood. It had seeped through the wallpaper, thick and dark, coating my fingers. The copper smell hit me so hard I gagged. I stumbled back, but the walls behind me pulsed again, and with each breath they exhaled, more blood bled through. It wasn't dripping anymore. It was flowing, trickling down in long streams, filling the cracks in the floorboards. And then I heard it. A voice. Not like before, not whispering my name, not pretending to be someone I loved. This was different. It was a chorus, dozens of voices tangled together, echoing from inside the walls themselves. We see you, we hear you, we have always been here. My throat tightened. My legs felt heavy, sinking into the floor as the blood pooled around my shoes. I forced myself toward the open door of 3B, because the hallway was no safer now than the room itself. The inside was worse. The walls were soaked crimson as if they'd been bleeding for years and no one had bothered to stop it. The carpet squished beneath me, black with rot and blood. The furniture was gone, every chair, every table stripped bare, but the outlines remained, burned into the floor like shadows of something that used to be alive. And the smell, God, the smell. I couldn't breathe without tasting metal. My head spun, but the notebook in my hands grew warmer, like it wanted me here. That's when I saw it, the writing. All along the walls of 3B, under the layers of blood, words were carved deep into the plaster. Not neat, not careful. They were frantic, desperate scratches written by dozens of different hands. I stepped closer, heart pounding, eyes darting across the phrases. Don't trust the man in gray. They took my brother. It's not the building, it's the walls. They eat names. Don't answer. And over again, the same line, etched so deep the letters seemed to bleed on their own. We live because we obey. I staggered back, bell rising in my throat. My father had said something like that once, hadn't he? When I was a kid, sitting at the kitchen table late at night, he whispered it like a prayer. I thought it was nonsense then, but now it was everywhere. The voices swelled, pressing in, the walls bulging as if something inside wanted out. And then from the far corner of the room I saw movement. At first, I thought it was just the blood shifting, but then it peeled itself away from the wall, dripping, reshaping into something vaguely human. Its body was made of shadow and gore, its face featureless except for a jagged slit where a mouth should be. It opened that slit and the chorus of voices poured out louder, shaking the floorboards beneath me. "We are the rules. We are the walls. You cannot leave." My knees almost gave out. I clutched the notebook, flipping the pages wildly, desperate for something to tell me what to do. My eyes landed on Rule 8, never let the walls hear you cry. And that's when I realized my face was wet. I'd been crying. The voices surged, almost triumphant. The blood creature stepped closer, its form unraveling and reknitting with every movement like the walls themselves were pushing it toward me. I bit down on my lip, hard, trying to choke back the sob building in my chest. The taste of iron filled my mouth, but it wasn't enough. A sound escaped me anyway, a broken, strangled whimper. The walls groaned. Blood gushed harder, spilling from every crack, every seam. The creature lunged. I threw myself sideways, slamming into the far wall, the notebook pressed tight to my chest. Pages tore, fluttering to the ground, each one scrawled with rules, each one screaming at me in different voices. The room spun, drowning in red, and then suddenly it stopped. The voices cut off. The blood froze mid-drip, hanging like threads of glass. The creature stood inches from me, its faceless head tilted. Slowly it raised one hand, if you could call it that, nothing but a dripping stump of gore. And with that hand it wrote something new on the wall. Not carved, not scratched, written in blood like a fresh command. 14. The walls remember what you break. I froze. The creature melted back into the wall, vanishing, leaving only the new rule behind. And then the blood began to recede, draining back into the cracks as if nothing had happened. But the smell lingered. And the voices, they didn't leave. They were quieter now, but still there, whispering beneath the plaster. Waiting, I picked up the notebook. The new rule was already inside, ink still wet, bleeding across the page. My breath shook as I read it again. The walls remember what you break. And all I could think was, I'd already broken something. I'd cried. I'd given them what they wanted. Which meant the walls weren't going to forget. I didn't sleep that night. How could I, with the walls whispering just beyond the edge of silence, with blood still dried on my hands? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faceless thing stepping out of the corner, its mouth splitting open with 100 voices. I told myself the new rule wasn't real, that the blood writing had been a hallucination. But the notebook disagreed. Rule 14 was there, ink soaked through the page. The walls remember what you break. The words gnawed at me. What had I broken? The old guard's notebook wasn't a set of warnings. It was a contract, and contracts never forgive. At dawn, or what passed for it in this place where sunlight never quite reached, I heard footsteps in the hall, slow, dragging, deliberate. I pressed myself against the door of 3B, heart hammering. Through the crack at the bottom, I saw boots. Not leather, not work boots. Bare feet, gray with dust, each toe curled wrong. Bones jutting out at angles. The boots stopped. The thing stood outside, listening. And then, faint but clear, it whispered the line I dreaded most. Rule 8. I froze. Never let the walls hear you cry. My throat tightened. I hadn't just broken it, I'd been caught. The footsteps moved on, fading down the corridor, but I knew it wasn't gone. It was waiting, testing, and the walls would remember forever. I forced myself out of 3B, clutching the notebook like a weapon, though it felt more like a leash. The hallway was darker than before. The light bulbs overhead flickered. Not with electricity, but with something heavier, slower, like dying fireflies. Every door I passed whispered as if someone inside pressed their mouth against the wood. I couldn't make out the words, only the rhythm. A chant. And then I found it, scratched into the plaster between 3C and 3D, nearly hidden beneath peeling wallpaper. The 8th rule is the most dangerous. My stomach turned. I peeled back the paper, hands trembling, and more writing appeared beneath, frantic, layered over itself like a madman's diary. They want your sorrow. They drink it. It opens the way. Cry once and they'll never stop. I stumbled back, vision swimming. My father's voice echoed in my head, late nights at the kitchen table, whispering the same line I'd seen carved in 3B. We live because we obey. I thought he'd been paranoid. Now I wondered if he'd been trying to warn me all along. Something scraped behind me. I turned, pulse spiking, and saw the wall bulge outward. At first, it looked like the plaster was swelling, but then a face pushed through, mouthless, eyeless, only skin stretched thin like paper. Its chest rose and fell, sucking air from the room. I bit down on my lip, refusing to make a sound. But the thing leaned closer, pressing its featureless face against mine through the thin barrier of wallpaper. I felt the heat of its breath, wet and rancid. And then, in a voice that wasn't a voice at all, but the groan of the building itself, it said, "We heard you. You belong to us now." I staggered backward, colliding with the opposite wall. My hand brushed another carving, this one almost completely erased, but enough remained to read. "If you break Rule 8, make them bleed first. Make them bleed." My chest tightened. My mind screamed that I was no fighter, that I was trapped in someone else's nightmare. But the notebook grew hot in my grip, almost burning until I dropped it. It fell open on the floor. The page had changed again. Rule 15 had appeared in jagged script that looked like it had been etched in with fingernails. "Their blood buys you time, but not freedom." I swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the words. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to follow, but the rules weren't suggestions. They were demands. And the only reason my family had survived for generations was because they obeyed. The wall face shuddered, pressing harder, the wallpaper tearing as thin streams of blood began to seep through. I backed away, but there was nowhere to run. I remembered the knife in my pocket, the one the old guard had left taped beneath the desk in the lobby, just in case. I'd laughed when I first found it. Now my hand shook as I pulled it free. The wall rippled. The face pushed out further, an arm forming from the plaster, dripping blood as it reached for me. I raised the knife. "Don't make me do this," I whispered. The walls groaned in reply, a sound like laughter, like hunger. And I understood then the 8th rule wasn't about silence. It was about survival. Cry and they hear you. But bleed them and maybe, just maybe, you get one more night. With a scream I didn't recognize as my own, I plunged the knife into the wall. The plaster tore like skin. Hot blood sprayed across my arm, thicker than anything human. The face shrieked, not in sound but in vibration, the entire hallway shaking. The light bulbs shattered, plunging me into strobing darkness. I pulled the blade free, stabbed again, and again. Each strike made the walls pulse harder until I thought the entire building might collapse, but finally, the thing retreated, folding back into the plaster, leaving behind a smear of red that slowly dried to black. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. I stood trembling, covered in blood, knife dripping at my side. The notebook lay open on the floor, the latest rule staring back at me. Their blood buys you time, but not freedom. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt marked. The walls had seen me fight. They'd remember. And then at the very bottom of the page, words appeared, written so faintly I almost missed them. The 8th rule never ends. I closed the notebook with shaking hands. My family had survived by obeying, but I was beginning to see the truth. Obedience wasn't survival, it was surrender. And the walls never forgot. The walls didn't heal. That was the first thing I noticed. After I stabbed the thing, I thought maybe the building would stitch itself back together, swallowing the wound, hiding the evidence. But the crack stayed. It widened overnight, bleeding black down the length of the corridor like veins bursting under skin. By morning, I could see into the wall, not the wood or insulation. No, what I saw was deeper, like the inside of something alive. Veins pulsing, tissue breathing. The building wasn't just haunted, it was a body, and I had cut it open. I didn't cry, I couldn't. The 8th rule lingered over me like a noose, and every time my throat tightened, I bit down until I tasted iron. But the building didn't need my tears anymore, it had my blood. Voices drifted from the crack, whispers layered over one another, familiar yet twisted. My father's, my mother's, even my own, mocking me. You broke the rule, they hissed. You bled it, and now it bleeds you. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the voices seeped through. The notebook shook in my grip, its pages fluttering on their own. When it stopped, a new line had been etched into the paper, black and wet as if the ink was still fresh. Rule 16, when the cracks widen, so does the hunger. Do not look inside, but of course I already had. The day stretched like a fever dream. The crack followed me no matter where I went. Down the stairs, across the lobby, even into the bathroom. Everywhere I turned, the walls sagged and split, tiny fractures spiderwebbing outward. The building groaned with each movement as if straining against itself. Once, I swore I saw a hand slide out of one of the smaller cracks. Pale, thin, fingers like sharpened bone. It scraped across the tile, leaving trails of blood before snapping back into the wall like a fish into water. That night, I barricaded myself inside 3B. I pushed the desk against the door, nailed the window shut. But the cracks still found me. They etched across the ceiling, down the corners, into the floor. And from each one, eyes opened. Hundreds of them, all staring, none blinking. I tried to stay silent, tried not to breathe too loudly. But the notebook betrayed me. It slid across the desk, pages tearing open, revealing a scrawl so frantic it nearly ripped the paper. Don't let them see your fear. They feed faster when you're afraid. Too late. My heart thundered like a drum. Sweat stung my eyes. The cracks pulsed, widening further until I could see shapes inside. Not ghosts, not people. Shapes that had never belonged to anything human, jaws too wide, limbs bending in wrong directions, skin without faces crawling over each other like insects. And they whispered in perfect unison, "Break the rules, break yourself." The desk rattled as the door flexed inward. Something pounded from the other side, not fists, hooves. The smell of rot seeped into the room, thick and suffocating. I gripped the knife tighter, though I knew it was useless. Cutting the wall only fed it. Every rule was a trap. Every choice led deeper. My family hadn't survived because they were strong. They survived because they were consumed slowly. One generation at a time. The door groaned. The cracks spread. I stumbled backward until I hit the far wall. My hand brushed against a section that felt different, softer. Wet. When I pulled back, my palm was slick with blood. The wall quivered, and then like a mouth opening, it split wide. Behind it was not another room, not even darkness. Behind it was the thing I'd been trying not to believe in. A vast hollow stretching forever, filled with twisting bodies, countless mouths whispering the rules over and over. Some were stitched shut, others screamed endlessly. I saw faces in there, my grandfather, my uncle, every ancestor who had lived by these rules. Their eyes begged me for something, release, or maybe damnation. My stomach lurched, my knees buckled, and then I realized something worse. The wall wasn't just opening, it was pulling. The cracks weren't spreading across the building, they were spreading across me. Thin fissures crawled along my skin, glowing faintly red. I dug my nails into my arms, but the cracks kept growing, veins of fire under my flesh. The notebook flipped again, finalizing its betrayal. At the very bottom, etched so deep it tore through the paper, words appeared. "You are the crack, you are the door." I screamed, shoving the notebook away. It hit the floor, pages fluttering like broken wings. The pounding at the door stopped. The whispers quieted, every eye in the walls blinked shut. And in that silence I understood. The building wasn't breaking. I was. The rules had never been about survival, they were instructions for transformation. Each one chipped away at whoever followed them, reshaping them into something the building could use. A vessel, a guard, a replacement. The last missing guard hadn't vanished. He'd become part of this place. And now it was my turn. The walls pulsed, breathing with me. The cracks in my skin spread to my hands, my face. I felt the building's hunger gnawing inside my chest, my fear and blood feeding it faster. I wanted to run, to claw my way out, but every step only deepened the fractures. I collapsed against the desk, knife clattering to the floor. My reflection in the shattered bulb above showed what I didn't want to see. My eyes glowing faint red, veins spiderwebbing across my face. The building had marked me, and no matter how tightly I clenched my jaw, I felt a sob break free. One single cry, the walls shivered with delight. The cracks widened. The cracks had claimed me. My skin burned with lines of red fire, thin fractures spreading across my arms, my chest, my face. The walls pulsed in time with my heartbeat, like we were no longer separate. I wasn't inside the building anymore. I was part of it. The notebook lay on the floor, pages fluttering like a dying bird. I didn't want to look, but my eyes dragged toward it anyway, and there it was, etched in black, darker than the rest, like it had been burned into the paper itself. Rule 17, when the last guard cries, the building chooses its heir. My blood ran cold. I had cried, just once. Just a sob ripped free when I thought I could hold it back. That was enough. The building had been waiting for that. The door to 3B shuttered. This time it didn't break inward. It opened gently, like a host welcoming a guest. The hallway beyond was not the same. The fluorescent bulbs burned blood red. Shadows stretched too far and the walls sagged like wet flesh. And standing in the doorway was the man in gray. His face was still half shadow, but his grin was clear. "It's about time," he said. His voice echoed inside my skull as if it didn't come from him at all but from the cracks themselves. "I've been waiting for you." I staggered back, though there was nowhere to go. The room pulsed around me. Eyes opened in the walls, hundreds of them, all watching. My skin split further, the fractures glowing. "What are you?" I whispered. He tilted his head, almost amused. "I was what you are now, the last guard. The one before me cried too, and so the building passed it down. Rule after rule, blood after blood. You're not the first, you won't be the last." My stomach churned. My family hadn't survived because of the rules. They'd survived because they kept feeding the building new guards, one generation at a time, a curse disguised as tradition. "Why me?" My voice cracked, raw and desperate. He stepped closer, and the cracks in the floor followed his boots. "Because you followed the rules, because you bled, because you looked when you shouldn't have looked, cried when you shouldn't have cried. You broke yourself the way the building demanded." I wanted to scream, to fight, but my body wouldn't move. The walls pressed closer, breathing against my back. I could feel the hunger inside them, gnawing at me, pulling me into their rhythm. The notebook slid across the floor, stopping at my feet. One final page, one final line, written so deep it tore through the paper. The last rule: when the heir is chosen, they must write the rules anew. My hand twitched. Against my will, I bent down and picked it up. The pen was already waiting, black and wet. "No," I rasped, forcing the word through my teeth. "I won't." The man in gray laughed, a hollow sound that rattled the walls. "You think you have a choice? Look around." The eyes in the walls blinked in unison. My reflection in the cracked bulb above showed a face that was barely mine anymore. Veins spiderwebbed across my skin, eyes glowing faint red. I wasn't human, not fully. "You either write," the man said, stepping closer, "or the building writes for you. And then you're nothing but another face in the walls." The walls groaned, sagging lower. Faces pressed against them from inside: my grandfather, my uncle, countless others. Their mouths opened in silent screams. Their eyes begged me to do it, to take the pen, to keep the cycle going. My hands shook. I thought about running, but the cracks in my legs had already spread too far. I thought about fighting, but the knife lay useless on the floor, rusted and bent like it had aged decades in minutes. There was no escape, so I sat. The desk was already waiting, pulled back into place, a blank page laid flat. The pen pressed into my fingers, cold and heavy, and as if my hand no longer belonged to me, I began to write. Rule 1: never look outside after midnight. The words flowed without thought, each one carving itself into the page. Blood welled from my fingertips, mixing with the ink. Rule 2: do not answer the knocks from the walls. My breath came shallow, ragged. Rule 3: never follow the voices calling your name. The man in gray smiled wider. His body began to dissolve into smoke, cracks swallowing him as if he was retreating back into the building itself. "You're doing well," he said. "Soon you won't even remember who you were. You'll just be the rules. That's all we ever are." Tears blurred my vision, but I couldn't stop writing. Rule after rule, page after page, each one binding me tighter, each one erasing me a little more. When I finished the last line, the notebook closed on its own. The walls sighed as if satisfied. The cracks across my skin sealed, not healed, but hardened like stone. The man in gray was gone. The room was quiet, and I understood. I wasn't me anymore. I was the guard, the heir, the keeper of the rules. The building no longer pulsed around me because it didn't need to. It pulsed with me. My heartbeat was its heartbeat. My breath was its breath. My hunger was its hunger. For the first time, I smiled, because now I knew what the final rule truly meant. The last rule: when the heir is chosen, they must make sure there is always another. And so I waited for the next sob, the next crack, the next heir. And if you're reading this, if the rules have reached you, maybe it's already too late.